Hi, my name's Andy LYON. I'm Head of Department for Marketing, Tourism and Events Management at the University of Chester in the UK. Today I'm going to talk to you about my research. The title is here, so are we any closer to sustainable development? Listening to active stakeholder discourses of tourism development in the Waterberg Biosphere Reserve, South Africa. So my research today, I'm going to outline what I did. I'm going to give a little bit of background to it, my very brief methodology, and I really want to focus on the analysis and the findings and my contribution to knowledge. My research aim was basically to examine stakeholder discourses of tourism development in the Waterberg Biosphere Reserve in South Africa, to really focus on how tourism can contribute to sustainable development in the region. And I was focusing on this notion of active stakeholders. Active stakeholders are basically people who can affect something. So these stakeholders can affect sustainable development. My research focused on the Waterberg Biosphere Reserve. A biosphere reserve is a United Nations designation which basically is designed to put into practice this idea of sustainable development. So the Biosphere Reserve in the Waterberg was designated in 2001, and it has gone through a number of iterations in terms of how it functions, but it still has that designation. Tourism in the Waterberg is basically been increasing over the last few years. It focuses on what we call bush activities, so ecotourism, so wildlife viewing. But there has been quite a big shift away from cattle farming and agriculture towards tourism in the area. So tourism is a very important industry to the area. There's very little cultural tourism in the area, which is of interest, and I'll speak about in a bit. Okay. So what did I do? I interviewed about 35 active stakeholders. Remember, these are active stakeholders who can actually affect sustainable development in the area. I interviewed a range of people: public sector, private sector, civil society, and some land claimants. And a lot of interesting people as well. You'll see there's some crocodiles. I interviewed crocodile farmers, taxidermists, and a range of other people as well. How did I analyse the data? Well, I used a method called critical discourse analysis. This method is really to really dig deep into the language of what people say. So it's about the coherence of text as well as the cohesion. And what CDA is really good for is bringing out issues of power associated with anything, but particularly ideologies and also knowledge as well. So that was the focus of my research, looking at power, ideology and knowledge. So what did I find out after interviewing these stakeholders? Well, what I really found out was that the stakeholders really don't have a strong understanding of sustainable development. When questioned, they replied in a very kind of loose way, so there wasn't a really strong understanding from the majority of the stakeholders. They saw the poor in the Waterberg as needing development. So this idea that somehow these people are underdeveloped, that's a lot of language that's used used quite commonly by people, and that tourism can somehow be a panacea to cure for all these problems that the poor have. There was a neoliberal approach to the environment, i.e. that the environment is really there just to be used as an economic resource, which was quite important. There was a very low understanding of the biosphere as well from the stakeholders. They didn't really understand what it was, how it worked, how it functioned, those kinds of things. They'd heard of it, most of them, but they didn't really know exactly what it meant to them. But they did have a very strong sense of place, a very strong connection with the Waterberg region, and that came across very strongly. That the environment was seen as really, really critical to the area in terms of its protection, and that it was really an important asset for tourism, and therefore it needed to be really, I suppose, conserved and protected where possible. When we come to looking at sustainable tourism in the region, it was found that tourism is predominantly a white concern. There's a lot of neo-colonial views put out there by some of the stakeholders. The poor were seen as basically, as I said before, needing development. There was very little cultural tourism, so the tourism product was really centred around this idea of the bush and the bush experience, which is really geared up predominantly to either white South Africans or white international visitors. The people who work in the industry, the workers, are predominantly black, but many of the organisations I spoke to struggled really to get good, skilled people. The case study that I looked at, if sustainable development is supposed to be about a bottom-up approach, a community-based approach, this wasn't really happening in the Waterberg to any great extent. There were elements of it, and there were certain people in the community who were taking things forward, but perhaps they weren't representative of the wider community groups. So the basic needs of tourism, of the population, weren't really being met. So did tourism contribute to poverty reduction? Not really. Did it contribute to basic needs for the poorer population? Again, not really. And all these kind of ideas meant that it's got quite a parochial perspective, how sustainable tourism development in this area, and that concurs with a lot of the literature as well. So these active stakeholders are really important because they can influence what happens in the area regarding sustainable development. So if a stakeholder can affect the three pillars of sustainability, economic, society and environment, then these are quite powerful people. And it's trying to understand how these stakeholders can affect sustainability, which is quite important. What I kind of ended up looking at really, or finding out, was that there are very unequal power relationships within development in the area. So how did I contribute to knowledge? Well, the Waterberg is a very under-researched area, so my research is added to the body of knowledge on the area. Also looking at policy, looking at how we can use tourism as a development tool, and understanding these active stakeholders is really important. Not just looking at how development works, but why is the critical aspect. And critical discourse analysis can actually do that. So we really need to understand these active stakeholder discourses in that development process. So when we look at the levels of knowledge from active stakeholders, that actually affects power. There's some very knowledgeable, powerful people who will affect these active stakeholder groups. Okay, so my publication is in the Tourism Management Journal. Hopefully you'll be able to find it there. And I've also got a paper hopefully being accepted on the Journal of Sustainable Tourism. So thank you for listening, and you can see the cute lion in the corner. That one, not this one. Thank you very much.